We already had a big beast up in the sky, and taking on the Boeing 747 was just not an impossible task. It was unthinkable. But the Airbus had one thing in mind: to make something bigger and something more luxurious. Double decks with a capacity to carry a shocking number of 800 people. A flying palace that promised to change air travel forever. So why did Airbus break every rule in the aviation playbook, and how did that gamble cost billions?
It took a century to go from this canvas and wooden structure through the flying boats, the jet engine, to the behemoths that we have today with the A380, the Super Jumbo, which had its inaugural flight from Singapore to Sydney in 2007.
In the beginning of the 90s, the skies were changing fast. Boeing had just introduced the 777 after the 747, sleek, fuel-efficient, and built for direct point-to-point routes. Passengers didn't want layovers anymore. They wanted non-stop flights, from Paris to Cape Town, from Singapore to Houston, and the market responded. Airlines were hungry for smaller jets that could dart between cities with fewer seats and more flexibility. But Airbus decided to do the exact opposite. They didn't believe in point-to-point. They believed in mega hubs, which is just a fancy word for super airports where thousands of passengers would pour in, connect, and fly out like ants through a tunnel. It was the hub-and-spoke model, and Airbus was ready to bet the entire casino on it. The logic? If you're jamming tons of people into one airport, you might as well move them in bulk. Not 250 passengers, not 350, but 800. That was the goal. One plane to move an entire stadium of humans at once.
The Boeing 747, the world's first wide-bodied jet. So wide, the Wright brothers' historic flight was shorter than its wingspan.
The idea wasn't new. The Boeing 747 had been doing it since the 1970s. But Airbus wanted to go nuclear. Twice the size, double deck, wider wings, taller tail, bigger fuel tanks, and a cabin so large you could install bars, lounges, and showers without blinking. They pitched it like this: airlines would make more money per flight, using less fuel per seat. Airports would handle more travelers with fewer planes. And passengers? They'd be flying in 5-star hotels at 40,000 feet. Everyone wins, right? Wrong. Airlines were already bleeding from fuel costs. Airports didn't want to redesign their terminals. And Boeing was sitting back, sipping coffee, pushing out their 777s like hotcakes. Even Airbus's own internal forecasts showed the market shrinking for giant jets, but they doubled down. In 2000, Airbus officially launched the A380 program.
A few years ago, well, remind me about what you said would be on board.
Yeah, I remember I told you that during the Paris Air Show. I remember at that time I said you will see that we will have a shower on board. And I think you doubted me at that time.
I'm afraid.
You know, and I think we prove it today that we do.
Your Highness, I said prove it.
Yes, and now you can see it on this aircraft.
They were chasing prestige. They wanted to crush the 747 and claim the crown. This wasn't just business. It was war. Europe versus America. Airbus versus Boeing. And like every good war story, it started with someone ignoring every red flag on the battlefield. Airbus was all in. But the stakes were higher than anyone realized. This wasn't an airplane. It was a flying skyscraper. 2 full decks stretched across its entire 240-foot length. Its wingspan? Wider than a football field. And when engineers sat down to build it, they didn't just break the design rulebook. They threw it into a jet engine and hit max throttle. From day one, everything about the A380 was a problem. A regular airport runway couldn't handle it. Taxiways were too narrow. The gates were too small. Jet bridges were too short. The plane was so heavy that existing tarmac started cracking under its wheels. So, what did Airbus do? They told the world to adapt. Airports had to widen their taxiways, reinforce their runways, and build special double-decker gates just to welcome this beast. Only a few major hubs could afford that. Most just shrugged and said, "No thanks." But the real insanity was on the drawing board. First, the landing gear. A typical big jet uses 10 to 14 wheels. The A380 needed 22. each one carefully positioned to spread out the monster's 1.2 million pounds when fully loaded. If just one gear system failed, the whole plane could tip like a drunk elephant. Then came the wings. These things were massive, about 80 meters across, but that size came with weight and drag. To lift the A380, Airbus had to create ultra-strong composite materials, add custom-built flaps, and design the most advanced wing-loading system ever made for a commercial jet. Every bolt and panel had to be tested for fatigue because this plane would be doing something no other aircraft had ever done, carrying hundreds of people across oceans daily without snapping under pressure.
Ladies and gentlemen, as soon as we've reached our cruising altitude and the preparations in the galleys have been finished, we'll be offering you a variety of drinks and canapes, and later on a hot lunch will be served.
Inside, the challenges didn't stop. More passengers meant more oxygen, more bathrooms, more wiring, more climate control, and more emergency exits. The entire fuselage had to be pressure tested for both strength and flexibility. Even the stairs between decks needed to be engineered to withstand turbulence and constant foot traffic. Every solution led to another problem. The engines? Custom made by Rolls-Royce and Engine Alliance, not because it was cool, but because nothing off the shelf could lift this giant. The wiring was over 500 kilometers of cable, so tightly packed that it caused production delays because design specs got mismatched between German and French software. It was a marvel, a monster, a mechanical miracle, and it was completely disconnected from what the average airline actually needed. Airbus didn't just build a plane, they built an engineering legend. But legends come with costs, and the bill was just starting to arrive.
European plane maker Airbus is staking everything on a machine that they hope will replace the big Boeing and dominate the market for years to come.
$25 billion. That's what it took to make the Airbus A380 fly. That's not the price of a fleet. That's just to build the thing. One plane, one project. $25 billion before a single ticket was sold. Airbus didn't just break financial rules. They lit them on fire, danced on the ashes, and hoped the market would follow. From the start, this was the most expensive bet in aviation history. Airbus had to build new factories, design custom tools, and transport parts on giant cargo ships and modified beluga jets because no normal logistics system could handle A380 components. Wings made in the UK, fuselage sections from Germany, nose cones from France, tail assemblies from Spain. Every piece had to be perfectly synchronized across multiple countries and languages. One tiny misalignment? Production delays for months. The complexity killed the budget. Airbus planned for efficiency. What they got was a logistical nightmare. In one case, wiring diagrams created in different software versions caused months of rework. Millions wasted because two teams couldn't open the same file.
And for Chief Commercial Officer John Leahy, the pressure is mounting. Leahy needs 250 firm orders for the project to break even. So far, he has 139.
Then there were the sales expectations. To break even, Airbus needed to sell around 600 planes. They didn't say that publicly at first, but insiders knew. This wasn't a passion project. It was a numbers game. Except the math never worked. Each A380 cost around $445 million, but airlines never paid full price. Discounts, bulk deals, and custom configurations chopped that number down. Meanwhile, the cost of flying the thing was brutal. It drank jet fuel like water, required massive crews, and needed near-perfect passenger loads to make any profit. We're talking 85 to 90% full on every flight. One empty row? Say goodbye to margins. Airlines didn't want that kind of pressure, and investors didn't either. Every delayed delivery, every production hiccup, every airport that refused to upgrade added more weight to an already collapsing financial model.
Plagued by cutbacks, fuel costs and industrial action of late, but one carrier that's not holding back in these trying times is Emirates. It's become only the second carrier to fly the Airbus Super Jumbo.
Even when Emirates stepped in and became the A380's biggest customer, it wasn't enough. One airline can't save a global product. The rest of the world moved on, leaning into smaller, cheaper, fuel-efficient jets. Meanwhile, Airbus was still stuck feeding a giant with bottomless hunger. By 2015, it was obvious. The A380 was a financial black hole. Airbus executives smiled for cameras and signed orders at air shows, but behind the scenes, the panic was real. The sales targets weren't being met. The backlog was shrinking. The future looked grim. Airbus had created the most expensive passenger plane ever made, and the market quietly walked away. The price of ambition? A financial burden no airline wanted to carry. 800 passengers, double-decker cabins, showers, lounges, even a bar at 40,000 feet. The A380 was luxury in the clouds, until it had to land. That's where the problems really began. Only a few airports in the world could handle this flying skyscraper. The A380 needed longer, wider, reinforced runways, special taxi lanes, custom gates with 2 jet bridges, one for each deck. That meant every destination had to spend millions just to welcome it. Most said no, not worth it.
170 knots, looking good. Perfectly balanced.
The next 4 hours will be spent gently probing the aircraft's abilities. 15 minutes in, it's time to retract the landing gear.
So right away, its routes were limited. You couldn't fly it anywhere. Only a few mega hubs could manage the size. The very thing that made it look like the future, its scale, also tied it down. Fuel was a disaster. The A380 was launched in a world of cheap oil. By the time it entered full service, fuel prices had spiked. The plane burned more than twin-engine jets but didn't offer more flexibility. It had 4 massive engines, each sucking fuel faster than most airlines could charge tickets. Efficiency was never its strong suit. Then there was the crew. The A380 needed more staff than any other plane. Flight attendants, engineers, maintenance teams, all had to be specially trained. Pilots had to get unique certifications just to fly it. That training took time, money, and commitment many airlines couldn't afford. Smaller planes like the Boeing 787 or Airbus A350 needed less. They were plug and play. The A380 was a custom experience, and that became a problem. Maintenance was more expensive, ground time was longer, turnarounds were slower, and if one flight didn't sell enough seats, the airline ate the loss. No other plane punished its operators so hard for not flying full. It demanded constant volume. A feast or famine machine in a world shifting to light meals. And the luggage. Don't forget that. 800 passengers mean mountains of bags. Loading, unloading, sorting. It was chaos. More staff, more belts, more delays. Again, small jets didn't have this problem. Worst of all, it wasn't flexible. Airlines love to swap planes based on demand. The A380 didn't fit that strategy. You couldn't put it on thinner routes. You couldn't change its schedule easily. It was too big to bend and too expensive to fail. In the end, the A380 worked only under perfect conditions. Maximum passengers, major airports, smooth logistics. But the real world isn't perfect. The plane was brilliant, but brutally unforgiving. A flying fortress? Yes, but built for a war that never came. When Airbus launched the A380, it thought the skies were ready for a super jumbo revolution. But by the time the world actually saw the aircraft fly, everything had changed. The gamble lost its jackpot, and Airbus had no way to win it back. First came the oil. The 2008 financial crash sent global fuel prices soaring. Airlines started bleeding money. Suddenly, efficiency wasn't just smart, it was survival. Twin-engine jets like the Boeing 787 and Airbus A350 were cheaper to fly, easier to fill, and could go almost as far. That was the nail in the A380's wing.
Aircraft manufacturer Airbus says it will stop making the world's largest passenger plane by 2021.
Then came the shift in strategy. Airlines no longer wanted mega-hub to mega-hub travel. They wanted direct routes, point-to-point, less waiting, more flexibility. A flight from Berlin to Boston didn't need a 500-ton monster. It needed a nimble jet that could make money even if half the seats were empty. The A380 couldn't do that. It was born for a world that no longer existed. Orders dried up. Emirates tried to save it, but even they started buying smaller planes. Airlines like Air France, Lufthansa, and Qatar began retiring their A380 fleets early. Some aircraft weren't even a decade old when they were sent to scrapyards. Think about that. Millions of dollars just parked in deserts, waiting to be torn apart. And the Airbus finally gave in. In 2019, they announced the end. By 2021, the final A380 was delivered. A quiet funeral for aviation's loudest creation. They built only 251 aircraft, less than half the 600 they'd once dreamed of. The project never made back its $25 billion development cost. But it wasn't all failure. The A380 pushed engineering to new heights. It proved that we could build something this massive, this complex, and make it fly safely every single day. Pilots loved how it handled. Passengers adored the quiet ride in space. For a brief moment, it truly felt like the future. Still, the skies are ruled by money, not dreams. And the A380, for all its glory, just didn't add up. It broke the rules and paid the price. Now it stands as a monument, a rare beast, a reminder that in aviation, size isn't everything. Timing, market demand, and fuel economy, those are the real kings. The A380 was a marvel, but marvels don't always last. That's how Airbus built the biggest plane ever and watched it vanish into history.